Welcome to the Boss It Weekly podcast, a no-nonsense, no-hype, frank and close-up analysis of what is currently working and what is not in the world of software. The Boss It podcast is packed with major takeaways for software business owners and managers. So, let's begin.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Boss It Podcast. At the end of the last podcast, I posed a question to you, which was, is the spoken word now more powerful than the written word? And the reason that I was asking that question, it's something that I've seen being asked through a lot of social media channels, in the fact that there's a generation that are growing up that are used to social media. Video seems to be ever more popular, and that's something that I've seen with a number of entrepreneurs that we've spoken to over probably the last 5 years that are using video in a number of different ways. It seems to be an important part of gaining engagement from people, because video, or television as it used to be, and film is a way that people have absorbed and you've used to sort of process information probably since a child. You've got a generation there that have, they've always known that. And I think that the written word, although for many of us who were educated predominantly through the written word, or definitely all the studying was done through the written word, there's now a different attitude towards that. And I think that there are a number of sort of, I don't call them gurus, but there are a number of people that you see on the internet that have been able to elevate themselves through podcasts, through video, very successfully by doing presentations. And it seems to be a way of communication that we all can use and adapt, and now it can be delivered through these channels, and there's a lot of technology through it. I mean, some of the recent podcasts. So I'd like to hear your views about that one. I definitely think that it's definitely very, very powerful. It doesn't replace books, but I think those of you that start to understand how, well, first of all, the potential power of the spoken word is, and also the means to be able to deliver that, it definitely seems to be able to create a great level of engagement. So from a technology point of view and from a marketing perspective, I would be very interested to hear your comments about that. So please contact me, and perhaps we'll have a podcast in the near future just focused on that particular topic. I know that we've touched on it in the past, but I think it's something I'm worthy of going into a little bit deeper. But today on the podcast, I have Colin Frith from Covvered. Now, Shane has got into the IT world sort of relatively recently, compared with many of you, in 2012. Before that, he was involved in a number of think tanks, both in New Zealand. He came across here to the UK in 2004. You may be able to hear from his accent, slight twangs of a New Zealand accent. And I've been watching what he's been doing with his company Covvered. I met Shane about a year ago after he came along to one of our Boss Equity seminars. And I thought it'd be interesting to speak to somebody who's right at that early stage, still developing their product, getting ready to release it, and see some of the things that he's had to overcome, some of the lessons that he's learned. So Shane, welcome to Boss It Podcast. Hopefully we're going to have good sound and quality, but thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to participate.
Tell us a little bit about Covvered, first of all, to put things in perspective. What is Covvered? Sure. What does it do? What are the benefits?
Sure. So in short, Covvered is going to help people keep track of their warranties, and it's going to do some simple things. It's going to make sure that whenever you buy something, instead of having a drawer full of receipts, we will keep a digital copy stored for you. But with that information, we're going to do a bunch of things. So first and most simple is we're going to send you a reminder 1 month before your warranty expires. So I've actually got a dryer that's slightly playing up at the moment, but I'm motivated to get the thing fixed rather quickly because I know that the warranty expires on the 19th of September.
Yes.
So it's a good time to go and get the thing done. And as a alternative example, I had a good friend of mine had a brand new car, and the car radio started to play up, and he didn't do anything about it because it was a minor problem and he was too busy. And he finally took it into the dealership 1 month after the warranty expired, costing him £800. So just something like providing people reminders of that a warranty is about to expire is going to be of benefit for you. We're also going to do things such as do automatic product registration for you. So as an example, a number of companies will give you an extended warranty if you register it with them. We can automate that process for you, which just speeds up, just helps people immensely in terms of how many people actually do sit down and fill out these forms.
Excellent. I know that I've experienced in the past issues around warranty. I think it was just a few months ago when I had a product that went wrong, and it was 1 day before the warranty ran out. So I acted really quickly and I was fine. But I thought just delaying a day would have made a big difference to me.
Yes, completely.
Yeah, so it's really important. Even understanding, the warranties and guarantees behind products. I think I'm a keen photographer, and I've had the experience of some memory cards that have gone wrong. And I know on a couple of occasions I'd had the memory cards for quite some time, and I just threw them away. But some of these memory cards, are quite expensive. You're talking about hundreds of pounds. It's relatively expensive. But when I actually checked, I found that they had a lifetime warranty.
Yeah.
Contacted the company, and they just sent me a replacement. Just as simple as that. I was quite surprised. I just wasn't aware, because we all these bits of paper, don't we? And you mean to fill them in, and you mean to organise them, and they end up just getting away because you're busy doing something else. And it can be a nuisance later on when they go wrong. I'm not that organised a person in that regard, so I've probably thrown away money, thrown away the product, or go and get them repaired. So
no, exactly. Lots of people think about warranties as purely as mainly sort of electronic items, but a classic one is Le Creuset. Le Creuset frying pans come with a 10-year warranty.
yes,
Who on earth still has the receipt from John Lewis for the Le Creuset frying pan that they bought 8 years ago, and it might actually be falling apart by now. And some of these manufacturers almost rely on the fact that you will forget your proof of purchase and all the warranty details, and so they won't make the claim, yet they still get to make these great offers that help the sale go through.
yes. I mean, we are a consumer society as well. People buy far more products, own far more things now, and to retain all of those warranties and have it organised, you're probably going to need to be taking around with you a filing cabinet, and when you move, quite often you think, oh, that's quite old equipment, I'll throw that away. That's if you've collected it in the first place.
Yes,
So I can see the potential of that. I want to start off, I want to cover at some stage during this podcast some of the difficulties that you've had to overcome, because I think that's always of interest to other software entrepreneurs. But I think it would be interesting to start off talking about your background working in think tanks, and then how you got to being a software entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about that. So that started off in New Zealand, did it?
Yes, I was involved in politics in New Zealand, but I was the sort of person who didn't really care too much for the day-to-day sort of gamesmanship that goes on in politics. I was far more interested in the ideas and policy, and I sort of where I drifted.
Yes.
And there wasn't a lot of opportunity for that in New Zealand, being a reasonably small country. And I got an offer for some work over here. I'd been to London many times, and I loved London, so I thought this is a great opportunity. So I jumped on the plane and came over. And as a result, I worked in a number of think tanks in London, and indeed I finished up working for one over in Brussels. And it was a thoroughly enjoyable sort of career, but at the back of my mind, I'd always had entrepreneurial ideas, and I came up with one that didn't actually work out, but it sort of propelled me into the startup scene and sort of got me hooked for better or worse.
That's interesting because I think any businessman knows what it's like when things don't work out,
Yep.
and that
Yep.
can be quite tough. So I'd like to have a chat with you about that. But give us a little bit more of a taster of the sort of work that you were doing in these think tanks. And for those that have never had any experience, perhaps explain how those organisations are funding and what their objectives are, and what it's like being part of that.
Yep. Sure. So as a bit of a comparison, I'd worked in political parties and I've been involved with political parties for most of my adult life. A lot of the time, political parties approach a policy position from is this popular? Is this going to win us votes? Whereas think tanks tend to be independently funded, and mainly by donations. Some of them get some government grants, but most that I've worked for have just worked purely on private donations. They'll approach an issue from from a point of view of, hey, here's the problem, how do we fix it? And in some cases they'll come up with things that are actually extremely unpopular with the public, but at least the think tank helps get these ideas discussed, because sometimes there's a reluctance to tackle the more pressing sort of issues. So I do think on all sides of the political spectrum, think tanks play quite a useful role. Otherwise, we just have a bunch of politicians working with focus groups and pollsters trying to find out what the public want, rather than sort of trying to objectively try to find the best solution to certain problems.
So it's a case of bringing a group of people together that have knowledge in that particular area, or maybe have got knowledge outside of that area or experience that they can apply in a new industry or to a different type of problem. And essentially, you are problem solvers.
Yes, very much so from that point of view. And it's a combination of people either involved in a particular field, whether it be health or education, or it might be trade or international affairs. So you might bring people who are actively involved in working in that field. So when I was involved in doing some work on health policy, yes, we brought in doctors and nurses and involved lots of people involved at that side. But we also brought in academics who were bringing a sort of some theory discipline to it, and sort of combining the two of them to try and look at fresh ideas and fresh solutions that might not have been discussed otherwise.
When you look back on your time working in those think tanks, are there any particular problems and solutions you came up with that you were sort of particularly proud of at the time, and maybe even today?
I think probably most of the individual issues we were dealing with, I'm proud of everything we did in that field. I think the only one I can think of that I was actively involved with was the independent schools debate, which was all about what they now refer to as the free schools, or which allows parents to set up their own school with government funding, independent from the local authority. I think that's one policy that I was involved with that's now actually come to fruition, and probably if you've got listeners here who might have children at one of those schools now, that I think that's been quite a major success since that was introduced about 8 years ago.
And what was the change that the think tanks brought to that issue? Was it?
Yeah, it was trying to cut through the, so often if it weren't for, what we see a lot of the time in public policy debate is what we'd call, a public capture, producer capture, where people involved in the debate are addressing it from the point of view that they are arguing for the benefit of everyone, but actually they're not. So to give you an example, quite often in education, the teacher unions will be heavily involved in a debate, but the teacher unions aren't actually there for the benefit of the students. They're actually there for the benefit of the teachers. And it sometimes takes an independent group that's quite detached from it, such as a tank, who will sort of come through with some fresh ideas, because a lot of the teacher unions were dead against this policy. But as a result of that, politicians were quite nervous of it because the last thing they want to do is buy a fight with the teacher unions. And
Yes.
so this is where sort of you get a different side of advocacy. Another example would be on health, in terms of quite often the debate on health policy is dominated by doctors' unions or teacher unions, nurses' unions and so forth, whereas by bringing in a sort of a third party, an independent, slightly academic think tank,
Yes.
can shake up the debate and give a different perspective, and certainly as we would see it, in the interests of the patients and the taxpayer, rather than just purely from the point of view of teachers, doctors and nurses.
How much in those days do you think that a lot of the opinion that you may have been hearing, and probably quite strong opinion, was influenced by social media? Had social media really impacted? Because I know that we get lots of sound bites, and people forming an opinion on the information that you get fed to you, and quite often you don't see the full picture. And when you're fed those sound bites, especially if you're being fed those sound bites as somebody who has a particular interest, you can end up with people with very strong opinions actually about a subject that they know little about, but that can create a lot of noise, and that can really complicate things. Was that something that you were seeing?
Yes. Well, just as I was leaving, so going back to the middle of 2000, I think it was September 2012, I left. Social media was, hadn't been around for that long at that point. I think most people had only been on Facebook for about 4 years at that sort of point in time.
Yes.
And so it hadn't gotten to the point we're at now, but but I still obviously follow these things. And what we have got ourselves into now is a sort of an echo chamber, that both sides of any argument, and obviously the classic one would be Brexit. You often don't get people listening to the other side. It's all very one-sided, and they only talk to people of one side of the issue, and they're completely shocked when they suddenly discover that there are actually other people with a different viewpoint. And I think that's deeply unhealthy to a society, and we do need to find a way to sort of get a slightly broader discussion on these things going on.
Yes, I think. I mean, my concern there is, in the past we would get the information through newspapers and television.
Yes.
And there were always newspapers that had their bias and they had their own agenda, and there were probably some of the very long established that would be well regarded because they just tried to provide a balanced view and deliver the facts. A journalist can have an opinion, but they need to be delivering the facts on the subject. The problem that I see now with even some of the well-established and trusted and respected media is that, especially with newspapers, they struggle now because of social media. There are probably less people buying papers. And sometimes I think in reaction to that, they become a little bit more extreme.
No, I think you're correct. And there's a demand from even sort of, to use the official term, broadsheet newspapers.
Yes.
Are introducing quite sensationalist sort of stories just, to get clicks.
Yes.
And
Clickbait.
I think that's clickbait, exactly. And I think it's a real shame. And but it's quite an interesting thing. I was, this morning I was listening to I listen to the Today program every morning, and they were doing the newspaper review. And last night there was a by-election in Wales, and they were discussing that. And of course they're doing the newspaper review, and they were talking about the fact that most newspapers weren't covering it on their front pages. But it made me sort of reflect on actually how many people today actually read the newspaper on the paper format, that actually therefore it matters that that story didn't break until 2:00. So they are struggling to keep up with sort of relevance and the immediacy of some breaking news, and I think it is then making them go down this path of trying to come up with something slightly more sensational. And I see it across the board. It doesn't matter if it's the Guardian or the Telegraph. They will, if you go through them, you will find some stories in there that are a little bit absurd.
Yes.
And that you do wonder why on earth, that's a story. So
Yes.
certainly a story that's in a, so-called respectable, broadsheet.
Yes, I mean, I suppose they're fighting for their survival, and the sensational headline
Yeah.
is their way of getting people to buy those papers. But the problem is, I think that there's another dynamic here, and I've seen that our attention span, and when they
Mm.
average things, and
Yeah.
they're talking about that we probably lead busier lives. Our attention spans tend to be a lot shorter, and we end up becoming educated by headlines. And when
Yes.
those headlines are sensational, we end
Yeah.
up with extremes of opinion,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and
No.
that's something that happens.
Yeah. And it happens across. In fact, I saw a story on the BBC today. It was just when the headline was quite sensational, but actually when you dug down into it, it was a fairly mediocre story at best. But it gave the nice, made people click on it. When it worked, I did. Obviously, they're not getting advertising revenue, but I think it helps them for their own sort of internal stuff that people are engaging with their stories. But it is actually having quite a sad effect because lots of people won't be digging deeper to question or challenge what they're actually presented with.
No,
I think the interesting thing that's become the term since Trump's election is the whole thing about fake news, and it's
yes,
out there. And if there is a good thing about this, I'm hoping people are starting to challenge what they read anywhere,
yes,
because not just on some newspaper link that pops up in your social media that you might not actually know, how reliable the source is. But even in mainstream news, it is well
yes.
worth challenging, what's actually behind this and reading through, because it is something that people need to be more cautious about. And it's, I'm hoping people become more aware of that sort of thing. Although, I think evidence might point the other way.
Yes, I've seen that. I think it can cause confusion as well. I know in the area of health and diet,
Yeah. Oh.
a lot of people become very confused through these headlines. And many years ago, I was quite involved in sort of health and fitness, and I had access to a database which was the latest scientific studies that were done around fitness and diet. And I would see sensational headlines, around you mustn't eat this because it increases cancer, or if you drink red wine, you're going to live longer, and people are
Yeah.
clicking and reading those things. And they were based on studies that had been done years previously. And I'm thinking, well, that's just a journalist who hasn't got anything to write. And they've extracted one element of this study and taken a line from it completely out of context. When you read the whole study, you get a much more balanced view, but they're not presenting that. They're not presenting both sides. So it's
Yes.
exactly what we're saying earlier. And people are going away thinking, so what do I eat? You can't eat red meat. You can't, you need to reduce salt and sugar, and it becomes very confusing. It seems like there's nothing that they can eat that's healthy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's bad because it causes a lot of confusion, especially if they haven't got access to the facts.
Yes.
People are more intelligent.
Mm.
People will work it out for themselves if they get access to the information. And that's one of the reasons why I'm keen on podcasts. And podcasts have, it's been around for some
Mm.
time, but they've increased in popularity because you get the long form. It's
Yes.
not a sensational headline. We're going to have a chat today. We're going to be talking about a number of different elements. They can get a feel for you. They understand the background where you're coming from, and I think that says so much more.
Yes. No, completely agree.
Let's talk a little bit about Covvered,
Sure.
and first of all, what are the tough lessons that you've learned? Maybe not just with Covvered, but with previous ventures that you've had,
Yeah.
because you said quite openly up
Yeah.
front, you've done things that have failed. What are
Yeah.
those key things? I don't know if
Yeah.
you've got any children, but if you had a son or a daughter and they wanted to go into technology and you sort of wanted to give them the things that you've learned, the pearls of your wisdom, put it that way,
Sure.
what would be the key things that come to mind?
Oh, quite a lot. But yeah, no, it is a challenge, and maybe to give you a bit of a story behind it.
Sure, go for it.
You often sort of get asked, a lot of my work is fundraising pitches, sort of trying to raise money, and obviously you get asked about, what have you done previously and what has failed, because people want to sort of judge you on the, have you learnt from that previous one. And I'm always able to say, I truly know how to fail, because my first tech startup that I got involved with was a company called Easy Order, and the idea was it was to allow people to order and pay for food and drinks mainly in pubs. And so we launched in a pub in Clerkenwell. And
Yes.
and we did this back in about 2013. We went live, and we had the app built, and we're all set up, and we were trying to get people to download and install the app and get started. Now, this is sort of almost 8 years ago now,
Yes.
and so in those days 4G hadn't fully rolled out yet, so downloading an app onto your phone wasn't something you were going to do easily, and people were still getting used to the whole smartphone thing.
Yes.
But we struggled to get people to actually download and use the app, to the extent of we were in bars offering them the first drink free if they downloaded to use the app, and yet we couldn't get people to do it, and very few people to do it. And
Yes.
so I'm able to say, look, you failed when you can't actually give away beer in a pub. It was to me
That's
that
great.
highlighted the inertia you find, and so this is something I've put into every other project we've worked on. It's a case of you can't just assume if you have a great idea. And when I told my friends about this idea of ordering and paying for drinks in a pub on your mobile phone app, when I told them this back in 2011, everyone thought, this is fantastic, this is a genius, you are going to get so rich from this, was the response most people came back with. Everyone loved the idea in theory, but the inertia of the general public to actually go and download and go through the process of registration, and technology has moved on. It's a lot easier now. A lot of time you can just register with Google or Facebook or something like that. So your registration process is a lot quicker, but it does highlight that it doesn't matter how great your idea is, the trying to get people to actually engage with something, even when you're giving them a free beer, is quite a challenge.
If you were relaunching that business today, or if you had the opportunity,
Yeah.
Now people have got access to 4G. Would you still launch it? And if you would you go about it in a different way?
I'd certainly go about it in a different way. I would probably be looking at different types of venues to get into, or I might actually be starting off with a smaller feature that's not actually a part of the payment process. I'd be giving something to people that would be, the first engagement with us doesn't involve putting their credit card into the app, which was a major sort of challenge that we had.
So some sort of seeding to get engagement before, because there's a certain level of trust.
Yes.
Somebody they're bumping into in a pub, or people who are presenting to them in a pub who they've never met before, and they're asking for their credit card details. I suppose that's part of it. They need to build a level of trust with you.
Completely, and so that's definitely the way I would go. Things have also changed. One of the reasons we failed was that our timing was poor. We launched just as contactless payment came out, and that's made quite a difference in pubs, because part of the rationale that we had is there was nothing more annoying than going up to the counter behind someone who wants to pay with their card, and they're tapping away on trying to put their PIN into the machine, and all those sorts of delays.
Yes.
Whereas today, actually, virtually everyone's paying for something with their debit or credit card, but they're just using contactless, and it's so quick and seamless that people have moved away, and so it's reduced that level of that tension that used to exist in pubs. So there is that sort of thing. That sort of impacted it. But yes, no, I if I was to go back to that field again, I would be definitely trying to offer something that would give people something for free that doesn't involve any payment. Provide them a free service as such that gets them started.
Do you think that the pace of the business also, because you never know what somebody else might be about to release, when you're looking at opportunities, and we're doing this all the time, looking at technology companies and trying to gauge if that genuinely has a really good opportunity, even when it does, looking at the current market, you don't know what somebody's going to release next week. And for yourselves, contactless. Whereas if especially for the smaller organization, if they can move quickly and at least get a foothold, you might then have been able to tackle contactless by offering something additional to that. But you've got to get that foothold first of all.
Completely. No, and we thought when I came up with the idea, there was no one in the market doing anything near what we envisaged with Easy Order, and we were convinced if we could get in there and get the first bit of traction, the revenue from the early business would actually allow us just to do everything else that you needed to do. So it was about sort of trying to get over that first hurdle and get the revenue in. So that was definitely sort of the challenge. And we were living in fear before we went live that someone else would come out and do what we had thought of. And as it happened, just as we were launching, about 3 or 4 other companies were launching with similar products. So, I wasn't the only person in the world who come up with the idea. Interestingly, virtually all of them have suffered the same sort of fate that we did, and 1 or 2 of them have morphed into something else. But broadly, at the moment, I've yet to get a pint of beer in a pub, apart from when I ordered with my own app sort of 7 years ago. So it is quite a challenge, sort of keeping an eye out for what sort of technology might disrupt you.
Yes, definitely. I think the one of the changes that we've seen is that over the last 5 years in particular, it's now easier to develop solutions and apps much faster. And as a consequence, we estimate over the last 5 years, there's probably been a 5-fold increase in competition for those startup companies. Whereas in the past, they may have had 3, they've probably got 15 competitors now. And that was based on a number of different studies that we've seen that are showing that steep increase. Lot more startup companies, because there's been publicized, and that's something that the media's done, is publicized, the big successes that have been in the software industry, people becoming billionaires within a few years. So it's seen as a very attractive area. There's lots of investment into the area. So that's naturally going to create to gain the attention of entrepreneurs and create a lot more competition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's a good thing. At the end of the day, it means the one that does succeed is definitely the product that the most thought and research has gone into to benefit the consumer. Which, at the end of the day, is certainly the approach that we've always taken. Is that you've got to keep your eye on who is the most important person. And in that case, it's a consumer. You've got to give them something that they want. And yes, so whoever wins in whatever field you're in is certainly going to benefit the wider public.
What are the lessons have you learned with Covvered?
Partnerships. We struggled for quite some time to get some serious traction, both with investors and in other fields, until one of my business partners helped secure us a number of very key strategic business partnerships that has transformed the way that we're now approaching the business. So, we've got some I won't go into massive detail here, but we've got some quite strategic relationships, both with companies that are going to help us with revenue generation once we're live, but also other companies that are going to help us with recruitment of users. And, we've got some major players in both fields that are going to help us immensely. And that was something I didn't have at that point, and sort of the weakness of the background I've come from in terms of having come from a sort of an academic think tanky world. Yes. I didn't have a lot of corporate connections, but my partner who's come on board has got a great background in working with EY and a number of other quite major listed corporates. He's got an amazing Rolodex of business contacts that's actually been able to help us secure the commercial relations that we actually need to help grow the business. And in the last 6 months, things have taken off quite well for us as a result of that, because we're able to sort of show to potential investors that we've gone a long way down the path of solving a couple of the big challenges that people had been saying to me for the past year. Well, how are you going to get large numbers of people to sign up to your platform when you go live? How are you going to generate the revenue? By securing these commercial relationships in advance, while it doesn't guarantee anything, it takes us a long way down the path to give investors more confidence that actually we're down on the right track to actually achieve what we want to do.
So what's the next big target for you? What stage are you at? What's the next sort of step that you need to make with Covvered?
Basically get the software finished and get it out. We've secured enough of we're always securing more, but we've got enough key business relationships now that when the software's built, we've got a pathway to get people to download and start using the app, which is crucial. And on top of that, we've also got a partnership with a couple of partnerships now that will give us almost immediate revenue. And if we can achieve, even a small percentage of the target sort of recruitment level that we want to get to, we'll be able to sort of cover our costs, which is the first hurdle to get past. And once we've done that, the further development, both in market and software, will become a lot easier.
Yeah.
Certainly the main thing I'm focused on now is to sort of drive the software team, and we've partnered with a company based offshore who are doing a lot of the development. We're out there a lot. I'm going there next week to work with the developers, is just to make sure that they're progressing well, and to make sure that we launch on time at the end of the year.
And without giving away any secrets, where do you see this product, this app going? What are the goals for you, and who are the types of organisations that you feel you're going to be able to work with and provide benefit? Because it can have further reaching. I discussed this with you before. The benefits can affect a number of different, really quite well established organisations. So who would be the type of organisation that you'd like to start talking to now to show them what could provide for them?
Yeah. So one area that we are working with at the moment is estate agents and letting agents, because we think there's a real benefit. In fact, and the estate agents and letting agents that we're talking to have identified that we have actually got a solution to problems that they have, of helping them keep track of warranties, and that helps them, and passing things on to new owners, or even allowing tenants themselves to actually effect changes, affect warranty claims quickly. So the best example would be, if you're a tenant and your fridge breaks down, you have to call the letting agent. The letting agent calls the landlord. The landlord goes through his bottom drawer to pull out all the information to say, yes, this thing's under warranty, and it goes back through the chain. We're aiming to short circuit that, to actually allow the tenant to actually have access to that information, that their fridge breaks and they can get told, well, look, straight away contact John Lewis, this thing's under warranty, and get the thing fixed. So and that's obviously of quite a large benefit to estate agents and letting agents, because it's reducing their workload, and reduces landlords' workload, and it's a benefit for tenants that they're getting things fixed. I remember when I was a tenant, anytime something like that broke, it often took at least a week before the thing got fixed, and it wasn't just about waiting for the manufacturer to get around to fixing it. It was waiting for the letting agency to track down the landlord, and the landlord to find his paperwork. So there's a real problem that we can solve there, and so we do think that through those sorts of areas we can drive some benefit, and that is where we think we can drive a large number of our users to grow the business rather quickly.
And where do you think that the strongest commercial argument is, either now or in the future, that your app will be able to provide?
Well, as I say, in that commercially, so I think the key thing we see,
because a lot of this comes down to money, doesn't it? People are always looking to save money, make money, protect money.
Yes.
if you've got the money argument there, I think that
Yep.
some of the sort of the time saving, which do relate to money, but if you can put your value proposition around a real clear commercial proposition, you've probably got a good foundation.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, most households have many thousands of pounds worth of products that are under warranty, and if you think about how much does go wrong in a given year, essentially we're going to be paying people to use their app by the amount of money that they will save by being able to make these warranty claims far more efficiently, and more importantly, not losing out on the claim that they could have made.
Excellent. Okay. And what are your dreams for Covvered and yourself? How do you see this going? Is this something that you're aiming to stay with for 5-10 years, or are you not clear yet?
You're getting to the exit strategy question. Yes.
Yeah.
We definitely want to. We're not too idealistic about this. We are doing this as a business to make money. We do see that we will want to move to an exit probably within 5 years would be the target.
Yeah.
I'm leaning at this point towards some sort, but where at this point is still up in the air. But certainly that's the broad direction that we want to go in.
And then it frees you up to perhaps go on another adventure.
As a sort of a bit of a serial entrepreneur, I've got a dozen different ideas in my back pocket at some point. It'd be quite nice to have a go at those. So I certainly can't see myself if it suddenly does make the large amounts that we hope. I'm not going to retire to a beach where soon. It's going to be a platform to sort of just start looking at other solutions and other problems, and even sort of mixing some of it with the past work I did in think tanks, because I think there are all sorts of different solutions that I think technology can be used to help address all sorts of problems. We just need creative ways to solve them.
Now I'm going to be doing podcasts coming up with some people who have published some books, so they're quite keen to come on podcasts because it helps publicize the book. But if there was one thing, people listening out there, what would you like to get? Is there a group of people that you would like to be able to have contact with that would help you in what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, no, we are always looking for partners to work with, either from if it's someone who thinks that, like the estate agent scenario, where we can actually help them and they can help us with recruiting users. And of course, we're doing quite well on the investment front at the moment, but we're always more than happy to talk to potential investors. But those would be the two key areas: potential user generators, drivers for us, and potential investors or other people with opportunities that wish to partner with us.
And if somebody wants to find out more information about Covvered, what's your website address? Is that the best way to contact you?
Yeah, best way, you'll be able to find a link through our address, which is www.covvered.com. It's covered with 2 V's instead of a W.
Excellent. That's brilliant. It's great to hear, Shane. It sounds like you're enjoying your journey with Covvered. I've seen as you're starting to form the business and it's starting to take shape, which is great. And I want to keep in touch, maybe come back in perhaps a year's time and tell us what progress you've made.
I'd be delighted.
Be interesting to get an update. So thanks very much for today, Shane. Keep in contact with us. Super. So that was Bossit Podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit of a different angle, somebody going through the very early stages, but I think there's some useful lessons to be learned. And if you've got some ideas for Shane, please get in contact with him. And it's the same for myself. If you've got ideas, if you know people that perhaps would be interesting to listen to on a podcast, or perhaps if you've got a story to tell yourself, then please get in contact. My name is Mark Edwards from Boss Equity, and this is the Bossit Podcast. Thank you very much.